It is officially draft season here on the PFF College Football Show. Max Chadwick alongside Dalton Wasserman here. Dalton, now we're getting into the 2025 NFL Draft full-time from now into the NFL Draft, and we got to start off with our top 10 quarterbacks in the 2025 NFL Draft. It's a pretty wide open quarterback class. I have not seen your list. You have not seen my list, so I can't wait to break it all down for the people today.
I'll tell you, I'm super excited for this whole series of episodes. We're going to do it every position group, right? And I think, well, first of all, it gives us a series of episodes to argue about something. That's going to be the best part out of all of it. And, of course, everybody's going to argue about their favorite prospects and how they have ranked at every position and who's the best one. Look, we're going to have a great time doing this, and I feel like we're going to differ on a lot of things here.
We will differ on a lot of things, and obviously we will have a lot of arguments on this show, but a lot of those bases that Dalton and I do our scouting from is from the PFF stats that are exclusive to PFF.com, and they are available to you guys as well. So go to subscribe.pff.com to get access to every single stat for every player in the NFL, every prospect in the 2025 NFL Draft, and every player in college football as well. And you get access to our 2025 NFL mock draft simulator. You can draft a full 7 rounds of your favorite team or all 32 NFL teams. You can trade players like Myles Garrett or Cooper Kupp. You can trade picks as well. All of it is available at pff.com. Subscribe.pff.com today. All right, Dawn, I think the best way to do this is we're going to go 10 through 6 first and kind of go over, the guys that are both in the 10 through 6 range for us, and then we'll get into the top 5 a little bit on a deeper level. So for you, who is number 10 through 6 for the quarterbacks in this year's draft?
So number 10, I have Dillon Gabriel from Oregon. At number 9, I've got Jalen Milroe from Alabama. 8, Riley Leonard from Notre Dame. Number 7, I know a hot name right now in draft circles, Jaxson Dart from Ole Miss. And number 6, your Syracuse Orange quarterback, Kyle McCord. My sleeper, Minnesota's Max Brosman. We're going to do a sleeper every time outside of these top 10, also in these position rankings, to kind of highlight a guy that we think could have some success, maybe as a day 3 guy. But that's my 6 through 10 right there, and I know there's plenty of talk around that guy at number 7.
Wow, yeah, there's a lot of talk. I have a couple of those guys in my top 5, actually, so we'll have to get to those guys a little bit later on this list. But I'll go through my 10 through 6 really quickly. At number 10, I got Riley Leonard, the quarterback from Notre Dame. Number 9, Kurtis Rourke, the quarterback from Indiana. 8, Quinn Ewers, quarterback out of Texas. 7, Will Howard, quarterback out of Ohio State. And 6, Kyle McCord out of Syracuse. And my sleeper is Tyler Shuck, the quarterback out of Louisville. Do you want to go over the sleepers first, you think, or should we save this for the end?
No, we could do that now since we already have.
You want to go over? Yeah. So Max Brosman, what do you like about him?
I think the more I was watching him, and I'd watched a lot of his tape from New Hampshire last offseason in prep to kind of see what Minnesota was getting from him. And I think the more I watch him, the more I see a bit of Jimmy Garoppolo from him. Right, he's a rhythm passer, doesn't have the biggest arm, but he throws the ball on time. He throws it well through zone coverage, very much like Garoppolo did. And I think there's going to be coaches that like just his acumen, the way he sees the field. Very quick processor from the pocket, doesn't really have a whole lot of mobility, so he's willing to stand in there, take some hits, make throws to his second and third read. I think you could even see somebody like a Kyle Shanahan take him, just like he saw with Garoppolo, like he saw with Brock Purdy, an undersized guy who throws in rhythm, isn't going to improvise like a Brock Purdy. I think he's a lot more like Jimmy, where he's going to stand in the pocket and process quickly, but I think coaches are really going to like him when they get to meet him.
Yeah, I had Max Brosman, QB 12 on my list, but QB 11 for me was Tyler Shuck out of Louisville. Now, he's been in college for a very long time. He spent 7 years in college football, playing it obviously at Oregon, then Texas Tech, and then finally wrapping up his career at Louisville. And he had an unreal year at Louisville his final season with an 88.5 PFF grade. He had looked pretty good at the Senior Bowl as well. He earned about a 90 grade for the week at Senior Bowl practices, which really would ultimately put him there at number 11 for me. Big guy, 6'5", 225 pounds. Like I said, 88.6 passing grade this past year. Takes care of the football. Only had a turnover-worthy play rate of below 2% this past season. Really good arm strength as well. Really good pocket presence. His pressure to sack conversion rate was about 10%. So basically 10% of the pressures on him this year turned into sacks. It's actually a really, really good rate. There are some guys in this list that we're going to go into that are basically double that, honestly. So I like Tyler Shuck a lot. I think he's got a really good arm. He showed a lot of improvement in his final year in college football, and he was always a guy that people liked the tools from at Texas Tech and Oregon, but he never quite put it together. In his final year at Louisville, he did put it together. So, he is older. He's not the best athlete in the world either, but I do think he could stick around in the NFL. He's got an NFL arm and an NFL body. I think he's a guy that could stick around as a backup for a while.
I agree with that, and a lot of his problem throughout his college career was was injuries and being too reckless with his legs. We saw that kind of go away when he improvised this year. He improvised to throw. And I think, getting under Jeff Brom at Louisville, who's kind of very quietly a quarterback whisperer. It seems like he always has a quarterback going on day 3, whether it's maybe a guy like Shuck or Mike White or Aiden O'Connell that finds a way to be somewhat productive in the league. So I think you make a good call. He got a lot better this year and had to deal with a lot throughout his long career in college.
Absolutely. So remind me again, who was your number 10 quarterback?
Number 10 was Dillon Gabriel for me.
Okay, we'll have to get through him in a second then. And then number 9, I believe you had Jalen Milroe. Again, it's in my top 5, so we'll get to them later on. Who was number 8, though?
Riley Leonard.
All right, let's go over him then.
And I think he squarely goes into the functional backup category for me, right? Low turnover-worthy play rate, but also a low big-time throw rate. We know he's got the heart of a lion, right? We saw especially certain times this year, you think about the Georgia game, even the national title game against Ohio State. He played very well and made some throws in the second half of that game that almost got Notre Dame back into it. But I think you have a guy who's reasonably accurate in the short range and the quick game. You have a guy who is very mobile. He's a really good athlete, right? I think you could center some of your run game around him. I think the bigger problem for me is getting into his second and third reads before scrambling and throwing the ball downfield, right? Again, a very low big-time throw rate. I think it's somewhere around 3.5% for his career. He just doesn't make the flashy throws, right? And I know he didn't have a great group of receivers, between at Duke and at Notre Dame, both places where he played. But I just think those times off-platform, he gets a lot less accurate. When he breaks the pocket, he's going to break it to run. So do I think he could be a functional backup who could come in and at least not screw things up? Yeah, I think he could do that. But the high-end throws are missing for me, and the downfield passing, that's an element that's missing.
Yeah, I think, listen, what he's good at, he's a bruising runner, right? He had 982 rushing yards this past season. Excellent pocket presence. I mentioned before the pressure sack conversion rate. His is only 12% this past year. Like I said, does not put the ball in harm's way. Only a 2% turnover-worthy play rate this year. Really good athlete, 94th percentile game athleticism score. And then he had a 92 grade at the Senior Bowl. That was the best all week among all quarterbacks as well. So he performed well at the Senior Bowl. But like you said, he's pretty limited as a passer. This is the first year of his career where he had a passing grade above a 70, and it was still only a 73.9 this past season. Like I said, not a lot of big-time throws, only a 3.6% big-time throw rate over the last 2 years. 65.9 passing grade in early downs over the last 2 years, 73 passing grade without play action over the last 2 years, and he's pretty rough under pressure with a 43 passing grade since 2023. So he's a tough quarterback. He's a really good runner. He'll take care of the football as a passer, but there just really is not a very high ceiling as a passer. I made the comparisons before to like a Tim Tebow almost. It reminded me a lot of just a guy who's a bruising running back, but pretty limited as a passer. And listen, Tim Tebow started for a little bit in the NFL. Now, I don't think Riley Leonard will be a full-time starter for a team, but I do think that, that kind of bowling ball that he is in the run game, in addition to being a guy who takes care of the football as well in the passing game, he should stick around in the NFL for a while.
I think the idea at the ceiling might be a guy like Tyrod Taylor, right? And before Taylor ever got a chance to start, he sat for 4 years in Baltimore, also a really good athlete. Greg Roman, once Taylor got to Buffalo, Greg Roman really centered the run game around Tyrod Taylor and his ability in the backfield. And he's a guy who every year runs a very low turnover-worthy play rate, right? So maybe he doesn't always make the biggest throws. He's a conservative passer. He's a really good runner. If Riley Leonard became something like Tyrod Taylor, who was a fifth-round pick back in the day and sat for 4 years before he got his chance, then you're talking about, I think, a road to success for him. But it's going to take a while for him to really become an NFL-level passer.
So, Dalton, we only have one other quarterback in our 10 through 6 range. We have the same 10 names in our top 10. But we only have one other quarterback that's in the 6 through 10 range for us, which is Kyle McCord. So I'll kind of go over him really quickly because we have a lot of guys that are in my top 5 that are in your 6 through 10, and you have a lot of guys in your top 5 that are in my 6 through 10. So we'll get to those guys in a second. But Kyle McCord, he was very conservative at Ohio State this past year, but he really let it rip this past season at Syracuse. He led the nation with 36 big-time throws and 4,760 passing yards. Did not put the ball in harm's way that much either. Only had a 14% negatively graded throw rate. He's accurate to all levels, top 20 uncatchable pass rate as well. Thrived under pressure, literally and figuratively. Like, he carried Syracuse, knowing he had to carry that team all year to a 10-3 record. And he had the 4th best passing grade in the country under pressure as well. 91 grade during the Shrine Bowl week as well. Weaknesses: he really did let it rip this year. He had 24 turnover-worthy plays, the most in the Power 4. Not much of a threat as a runner. He's 192 rushing yards over the last 2 years, only a 50th percentile gas score as well. At Ohio State, Kyle McCord played very much not to lose. But in Syracuse, he played to win, and and he had a great year because of it. I think his game is still too much of a little bit of a roller coaster right now to really bet on as a long-term starter. But I think he could be a really, really fun backup in the NFL for a long time. Now, I don't think he has the ceiling of this guy, but like Jameis Winston, for example, who will have some unbelievable throws and then some head-scratching turnover-worthy plays as well. Kyle McCord kind of reminds me of that a little bit. So I think, again, he's kind of like that fun backup that's going to come into the game, and you never really know what's going to happen with him.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of guys in this class who, to me, their biggest weakness is going to be a lack of mobility and a lack of answers under pressure unless they get rid of the football quickly, right? And McCord, he did that at Syracuse this year. He was very good against the blitz. He had a very quick average time to throw. I think you have a guy who does have an NFL-level arm, who has now an NFL level of confidence, that's for sure. Throws the ball down the middle of the field, down the seams really, really well, and is unafraid to throw it down the middle. And I think that's something that some of these quarterbacks in these college systems that they run, where it's so much about getting the ball outside the numbers and outside into space, it's emphasized a lot. There's quarterbacks even in this class that don't throw over the middle very much at all. Kyle McCord is not that. He's a strong pocket passer who's going to let it rip down the seams. I think you have a guy who, you're right, could develop into a good backup, into something of a fun backup, right? He is a gunslinger now from what he became this past season, and I do like that he's a relatively quick processor, and he can get rid of the football quickly and down the field.
So, again, like I said, we've only gone over 2 quarterbacks so far in our top 10, and that wraps up the guys that we have in the 6 through 10 range for each of us. Let's go over your guy who's at number 5 on this list that I had at number 9 on my quarterback rankings. Who's number 5 for you?
I have Kurtis Rourke from Indiana at number 5, and we'll go through the top 5 right now.
Yeah, there you go.
And then we'll go through them one by one, because you know what? I think it speaks to the rankings, too, and the way this class is, that beyond those first 2 guys, 3 through 10 or even 12 is a real crapshoot right now. So I have Kurtis Rourke from Indiana at number 5, Quinn Ewers from Texas at 4, Will Howard from Ohio State at 3, Cam Ward second from Miami, and you know I'm as big a Shedeur Sanders fan of anybody from Colorado. I came into this season thinking he would be QB1 for me in this draft, and I come out of it thinking the same thing. We'll get to him in a minute, but like you mentioned, we'll start with Rourke at number 5, and I actually think he's extremely similar to McCord. I could really put either of them and kind of coin flip it. Strong pocket passers, willing to throw over the middle of the field, willing to throw to intermediate parts of the field. I think, again, the big weakness is a lack of mobility. And I watched Kurtis Rourke. So McCord this year kind of took on the Jameis Winston gunslinger personality. I watched Kurtis Rourke, and I think he's kind of a throwback. I think like 20 years ago when you had guys like Vinny Testaverde and Brad Johnson and really statue pocket passers like that, I think he would have been drafted a lot higher. And I think a part of it is, I look at his 2022 tape from Ohio before he tore his ACL. He was the highest graded quarterback in the country that year, and he was really, really accurate. When he gets his feet set in the pocket, he's capable of making any throw on the field. The issue for Rourke is going against the blitz and going against quick pressure, and again, having answers for pressure because he's not all that mobile. So really, him and McCord I could almost put tied for 5 because they're very, very similar. Rourke is a little safer with the football than McCord. McCord takes his chances downfield a bit. I think Rourke, in Curt Cignetti's system, and to prove it, but first of all, extremely productive at Ohio, but then to prove it against Big Ten competition and go against that level and still make the playoff. And I know Notre Dame got him, right?
Yeah.
And Indiana, kind of a lack of speed and a lot of man coverage was really their undoing. But Kurtis Rourke was really good at Ohio. He was really good this year at Indiana. I think he's another guy to me, and I know this is all the way up at the 5th spot, and this is where this class is. There's just not the depth that we had last year. Projects as a high potential backup. I would love to see him in a place like the Chargers with Jim Harbaugh and sitting behind Justin Herbert. I think that's somewhere he could succeed if he went there in the 4th or 5th round. But I think Rourke is another guy like McCord who could be a high-end backup in this class.
I agree with you. I do like Kurtis Rourke a lot. He had an incredible year at Indiana in his one season there. He had a 90.2 passing grade, led Indiana to their best season in school history and the college football playoff as well. He was top 35 in big-time throw rate and turnover-worthy play rate, 72 passing grade under pressure. He ran the RPO, I thought, beautifully at Indiana. He had a 93 passing grade off of play action this year. I thought he throws with very, very good touch on the football. That's something I really noticed on his tape. And you mentioned the rushing, Dalton. Well, I think one thing we got to keep in mind, he played on a torn ACL all season at Indiana this year. So he tore it a year or two ago against, in Ohio, and then he retore it in August. And he was still able to play on it, even though some doctors told him, "Hey, you should probably get surgery and be out for the year." And he goes, "No, I'm playing on this," and he did. So I think that's another thing too we got to keep in mind with Kurtis Rourke is like, yes, because he actually at Ohio he tested out in the 92nd percentile of our GAS score, our game athleticism score metric, which measures your speed, agility, all that on the field. So he's still a pretty good athlete at his size, and I think that probably was why his rushing numbers weren't that great this year, was because he played on a torn ACL. Now, what I don't like in Kurtis Rourke's tape and why I had him a little bit lower than you, I think his arm is relatively average. I think his pocket presence isn't very good right now. He had a 27% pressure to sack conversion rate this past year. He's okay without play action, and he's a little older in the class as a sixth-year player as well. But like I said, I mean, he showed his toughness by playing on a torn ACL all season and still being one of the best quarterbacks in America. I think he really should stick around in the NFL for a long time as a backup.
I think what I was impressed with when it comes to the knee injury and that news coming out after the season, and remember he had a thumb injury in the middle of the year too, that he missed one game and then came back and fought through in their biggest games of the season, is that what I was concerned with, so he tore his ACL the first time towards the end of 2022, comes back in 2023, didn't look right, and I think more than the mobility, didn't look right in his base throwing, and I think you could see it, he was falling away, didn't really step into his throws. So I was curious coming into Indiana in 24 about, okay, is he going to be able to step into his throws and have a solid base and make the throws? And he did it all year. If they hadn't said it afterwards, I would have never suspected it. His mechanics look great all season, and I just think, again, the big concern for me, and Indiana's pass protection was also kind of suspect against their better opponents, is handling the blitz and really getting the ball out even quicker than he already does. You mentioned in the drop back game, right, without the RPO help that was in Indiana's offense. But I think a safe guy to take and develop as a backup quarterback. And I think if you do have really, really good pass protection, he can make a lot of the throws on the field. You mentioned it, the touch and the intermediate throws, I think were as good as almost anybody in this class.
Absolutely. Sorry, Kurtis Rourke for you, number 5 in the draft, and Kurtis Rourke is number 9 for me in the quarterback rankings. I'll go to my guy, who's number 5, and you're number 10. That is Dillon Gabriel out of Oregon. He's basically as experienced as they come. He's been starting in college football for 6 years now at UCF, at Oklahoma, and at Oregon. Supremely accurate. He had the 6th best uncatchable pass rate over the last 2 years. Excellent at not putting the ball in harm's way either. 7th best turnover-worthy play rate this year. 94th percentile at avoiding negative throws as well. And really good pocket presence, about a 14% pressure to sack conversion rate. However, he's only about 5'10", 200 pounds, below average arm strength. He had a 107th big-time throw rate this past year in college football. And I think he's kind of an okay runner despite being smaller. So you would think a guy who's 5'10", 200 pounds, you think of like a Kyler Murray. He's not like that at all. He had 300 rushing yards this past year and only 26th percentile in our GAS score. His lack of physical tools will likely keep him from ever becoming a starting quarterback in the league, but he's been around the block for a very long time. He's expertly filled the role of a point guard at UCF, at Oklahoma, and at Oregon his entire career. He should have a long career in the NFL as a backup, and if your starter gets hurt, you have a guy in Dillon Gabriel who knows the offense, knows how to run the offense, and can do it at a pretty decent level. So I think he can come in and run the offense in a pinch, and I think he's a guy that I could honestly see Dalton be like a coach after he's done playing, the way he's been able to run the offense at a very, very high level for a very long time. So, again, the physical tools, I think, will keep him from ever becoming a true long-term starter, but I think he's been so good over his career that I had to put him in my top 5.
Another guy in the functional backup category. And that lack of tools, the consistent struggles when throwing in the red zone and into tight windows are something for me that shows you, okay, he doesn't obviously have an A-plus arm. You mentioned it, 5'10 and a half, 200 pounds, and a heavy play action system that he's run really throughout his career, especially at Oklahoma and then this year at Oregon. So relying on play action, relying on a lot of those RPOs, relying on making a lot of outside throws. This year could make some of those throws over the middle to Tej Johnson, because Tej Johnson's such a freak who always gets open. But, I believe it was Daniel Jeremiah compare Dillon Gabriel to Kellen Moore. And everything you just described in the road of going from decent backup to coach and now head coach for the New Orleans Saints pretty soon here. I don't know if Gabriel will ever be a head coach of an NFL team, but I think it's a reasonable comparison when you talk about first of all, an undersized lefty passer who won a boatload of football games in his college career. Kellen all at Boise State, Dillon for 3 different schools. We saw that on his Senior Bowl helmet. I think you have a guy, he knows offense. He's accurate. He's relatively decisive. I did like at the Senior Bowl that he seemed to have the best grasp of getting in through his progression and through his second and third read, especially in the practices. And he is accurate, especially in that short to intermediate range. But I would just question whether he can play up to NFL speed. I think he's a good athlete, but he's not a dynamic athlete by any means, and make those tight window throws. And especially, I just keep going back to the constant every single year, and even through the Senior Bowl practices, we saw on that third day of practice. Once he gets down in the red zone, things get a lot tougher. It's just harder for him to really drive the ball into those tighter windows, and NFL speed is way different than college speed when you talk about having to anticipate those throws. So the lack of tools is what dropped him down. I do think, look, we mentioned it, 3 through 10 here, they're all pretty similar. You could have them in any order, and I wouldn't complain too much. I do think there is a world where he's, again, like Brosmer, like Leonard, like McCord, like Rourke, there's a road where he's a functional backup, absolutely. I just think you have to have a system where, RPO is getting more prevalent in the NFL, and I think he's a guy who would prefer to throw outside the numbers.
So, in my opinion, 3 through 10 in these quarterback rankings, all of them, to me, are backups in the NFL. So, I was looking at just, okay, what do I want out of a backup quarterback? And Dillon Gabriel being in my top 5 is basically, hey, I think he's a high floor as a backup. There's a couple other guys we'll get to that have very high ceilings, but low floors. Dillon Gabriel, I think, out of the 3 through 10 range, might have the highest floor of any of these potential backup quarterbacks in the NFL. Let's go over my number 8 guy, Dalton, and your number 4 guy. That is Quinn Ewers out of Texas. What did you like out of him?
I think you mentioned it. There's a ceiling floor thing here, and the floor for Quinn Ewers is something we've seen often when it comes to the lack of pocket presence, and then him too, even though he's got a boatload of arm talent, the lack of willingness to drive throws into tight spaces also. But then it's always you go back to those moments, right? And there are high-end throws that he has made in his career, albeit sparingly. The 2 Alabama games we think about, the Washington game in the playoff 2 years ago, here and there. Even the Arizona State game this year, he was fantastic, right? I know that's not the best defense in the world, but that's a pretty good secondary he's going against, and he made big-time clutch throws in that game. I think somebody's going to take him for your favorite 5-star recruiting profile. And he does have talent. It's in there. It's just, it feels like at times we don't see the confidence, right? Like, how can we get this guy and maybe even develop him behind the scenes, behind good protection? He's not the most mobile guy in the world, right? And his footwork in the pocket can be jittery. Can we get this guy protected? Can we get him to step up vertically into the pocket, and can we get him to make more of those big-time throws? Because I think, of a lot of these, I know Kyle McCord led the nation in big-time throws, but I think Ewers has more natural, looser arm talent, right? And again, I think you having him down, you said you had him at 8.
8.
I get it.
Yeah.
Like, I totally get it with these quarterbacks because it's so hard to rank them beyond the first 2, I think. But I think the high end is like, it makes you believe. He throws with excellent touch on the football, maybe as good as anybody in this class. He's one of the best intermediate passers in the country. Again, would I take him before, honestly, the 4th round? I don't know if I'd take any of these guys we've just mentioned before the 4th round, but I think he's someone who you look at the high-end throws, you look at the touch he throws it with, you look at the arm talent, and even at times off-platform. We saw it in the Michigan game. There was a couple other throws throughout the season where you go, it's in there. We just need it just to come out a little more often, right? Quinn Ewers, I think, is the most frustrating player out of this entire list, which I get. If you don't believe you can get it out of him, you have him 8, 9, 10. If you think maybe there's a coach who could get it out of him, I don't know. I think you mentioned at one point, say the Rams with McVay, and you sit him behind Stafford for a year or 2, and you develop him, and you just get him to see it and throw with confidence. Maybe that works, right? But it's that high-end stuff that makes you go, okay, I got to put him ahead of Rourke. I put him ahead of Leonard because he's made better throws, I think, than Leonard throughout his career. Maybe even Kyle McCord because we only have 1 year of it, and that's really gunslinger-ish. Quinn Ewers is a tough guy to place here. It's tough. And I think, like in last year's class, he would have been 7 or 8 for me. And you mentioned it. He might be 7 or 8 on some team's board. He might be the hardest guy out of all of them to place because you can see, because the ups and the downs are all there.
Yeah.
It's all right in front of him. We left Ann Arbor when Texas beat Michigan, and we were like, man, he might be actually on his way. And then it just kind of petered back, and the injuries this year too didn't help him, and Arch coming in and playing really well didn't help him either. But I think Quinn, somebody's going to take a chance on him. And maybe even earlier than we think, maybe even in the 2nd or 3rd round, because the talent is in there.
You look at the consensus board right now. I believe he's still like a top 50 player on the consensus board. right now.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Or 61.
That's another thing that needs to get adjusted because I think, is it still 7 of these guys are inside the top 70?
It is, let's see, 1, 2, excuse me. Yeah, I think there's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 in the top 70. Will Howard 77. Dillon Gabriel 83.
Okay, so they moved Howard and Gabriel out of it. There was at one point 7 of them were in the top 70, and I was like, no.
That's still 7, day 2 picks though. Day 1 or day 2 picks.
Yeah, I'm not in on that.
Yeah,
I think there's a very clear split here between the top 2.
Yeah.
And the rest, like a big split, much bigger than people are making it out to be.
And we'll get to that. I just think it's so funny and ironic, and honestly, it fits Quinn Ewers beautifully in that, Dalton, when we put out our way too early 2025 NFL mock draft, do you remember when I was telling you, Dalton, we need to put Quinn Ewers in this mock? You're like, no, we don't. Because you didn't like his tape that much last year. I was like, no, listen, he was good last year. We got to put him in the first round. Like, I was high on Quinn Ewers. You were low on him. I think we flipped now where you're like, there's something there with him. And I'm like,
again, I totally get why you have him there. And I debated it. Like, Ewers, Rourke, and McCord, I could have put in any order and I could have justified it. That's where they're at. I think they're all extremely similar. I think you see a lot of good. I think you see a lot of things that make you nervous. I think they're very much in that same bandwidth. If you take any of them, you're probably taking them for the same reasons. You see some good things and they all do it a little bit differently. You see some bad things and they all do that a little bit differently. So, do I have him 4th on this list? Yes. Am I super, super high? Like, I would take the late first round gamble on him? Absolutely not.
Yeah, so what I liked out of Quinn Ewers, he broke the pocket a lot this year, but he actually was pretty good when he was outside the pocket. He had a 90.6 passing grade outside the pocket, 93rd percentile. What made him one of the highest rated quarterback recruits of all time was his strong arm. He's got a very, very strong arm. Now, he throws a touch all the time. It's got to be changed a little bit. I think that stems from his footwork a little bit. But I do think, because he throws off his back foot a lot when I watch his tape, but I do think he's got a strong arm that, if he plants off his front foot more often, he will be able to drive the ball in, because he does have that rocket launcher arm. Last year, I thought he did a really nice job playing within Steve Sarkisian's offense. He had 85.6 passing grade last year, and he actually throws a pretty catchable football. He was top 30 in uncatchable pass rate over the last 2 years as well. Now, why I have him a little bit lower? He had one of the best supporting casts in college football, and he still left a lot to be desired. Steve Sarkisian, one of the best offensive minds in the sport, nation's best offensive line and pass pro, and an elite receiving core. I mentioned his footwork needs a lot of work. He's often flat-footed when he throws the ball. He relies so much on his arm, right? There's really no lower body in his throws at all. He relies really all on his upper body to make every throw, which could lead to some accuracy issues sometimes. 24% pressure to sack conversion rate over the last 2 years. His pocket presence, especially this last year, it was rough. There were times out there where he had clean pockets and he still got sacked because he just ran into opposing defensive linemen. Without play action, he has a 74 passing grade over the last 2 years. Again, I mentioned before, he throws with way too much touch. Doesn't really add anything as a runner either. Only 90 rushing yards this past season. And the other thing too, he has missed multiple games in all 3 seasons as a starting quarterback at Texas too. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on as well. So listen, Quinn Ewers, he played really well within the scheme 2 years ago. Wasn't nearly as efficient this past season. He's really has a lot of physical talent, but I think he's still a very, very raw quarterback in a lot of other areas, which is why I had him a little bit lower on my list than you.
Yeah, you mentioned the footwork, and footwork is teachable.
Yeah.
But then I sit here and I wonder, I go, why wasn't it? Was it not taught the last 3 years?
It's Steve Sarkisian too. Or
is it just not sticking?
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes look, everything's habitual, right? It's all about habits. So if you can get him in better habits with his footwork, things could start to work. There's very much a range of outcomes for Quinn, and I think it does go along with the idea that he's another one of these guys who it would really benefit him to sit behind somebody and continue to work on the fundamentals and then get on the field. If somebody was sitting here and they believed in Quinn Ewers enough to start him day one, I would have serious reservations about that.
Yeah.
I think you work on those things behind the scenes and see where it goes.
Absolutely. All right, so we've gone through 5 of our top 10 quarterbacks in this year's draft. We'll get to the next 5 very quickly. But before we do that, we got to talk about the sponsor of the show. That is Fabric by Gerber Life. What does your child's future success look like to you? A job they're passionate about, traveling around the world, or just being happy and comfortable? Whatever their journey, you can now make it easier to achieve with a kids investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life. By making a contribution to your child's future today, you can help give them the means to pursue their dreams big and small. Fabric Urban Life is designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Funds can be used for nearly anything benefiting your child, from tuition and tutors to music classes, and when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. It's all online. Manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Unique gifting links can be shared with family and friends, so instead of more stuff, they can help grow your child's future investments for their future instead. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFcollege. That's meetfabric.com/PFFcollege. meetfabric.com/PFFcollege. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, so you went over your number 5 and your number 4. We already went over Dillon Gabriel, who was my number 5. Let's go over my number 4, Dalton. And I believe you had him, number 9 on your list in Jalen Milroe?
Yep.
The quarterback out of Alabama. This is a tough one, man. This really is a tough one. So the reason why I think this is similar to Quinn Ewers in some ways, where it's still physical tools is what you're betting on here, and it's still raw in a lot of areas. But I do think Milroe played better than Ewers over the last couple of years. And physical tools, man, they are out of this world for this guy. Pretty easily the best physical tools, I think, in this entire draft at quarterback. Game-breaking speed. He breaks angles, even from defensive backs. He runs away from defensive backs sometimes. He had a 22.9 miles per hour in our tracking, 99.8th percentile gas score as well. And then a rocket launcher of an arm. He could throw 65-plus yards. His velocity often makes a lot of issues that he has with timing, because sometimes he is late to throws, but he has such a strong arm that he could rocket it in there even though he is late to it. 7% big-time throw rate over the last 2 years. That's 9th in America. While he's not perfect, I thought he did a better job this year of getting rid of the ball quickly and avoiding unnecessary sacks under Kalen DeBoer. Also, something I found, 89.9 passing grade when he was moved off of his first read. That's the best in the Power 4 this past season. And also, I've heard nothing but incredible things about his character. I would have no issues with him being one of the leaders in my locker room. Now, the issues. He's still raw as a passer. His accuracy and footwork are all over the place. 10th percentile at avoiding negatives. His accuracy rate over the last 2 years is 109th in the country. 55% of his throws were accurate over the last 2 years. Pocket presence, I mentioned before, was a little bit better this past year, but it's still rough overall. About a 26% pressure to sack rate over the last 2 years. And at the Senior Bowl, it was not a great showing for him. He had a 51.9 grade at the Senior Bowl between practices and the game as well. I think Jalen Milroe, in theory, is way different than what Jalen Milroe actually is right now. The physical tools are out of this world, and they're easily the best in his class, but there's a lot of work to be done before he can belong on an NFL field. It's very possible that he develops, which is why I have him here at number 4, but that's a risky gamble because there's so many guys you think, okay, well, listen, Josh Allen developed, but for every Josh Allen, there's 10 Malik Willises, and that's actually my comp for Jalen Milroe is Malik Willis. So, again, the physical tools are there. He's got the best physical tools in the class. He's played good ball over the last couple of years as well, whereas I think Quinn Ewers has showed more struggles than Jalen Milroe in the same conference as well. But there's still reasons why I have him at number 4 on this list and not at number 1 or number 2.
There is such an up and down nature to Milroe's game, right? And he's that guy. He's that hitter in baseball who hits 40 home runs and strikes out a whole lot, right? The Kyle Schwarber type of guys, yep. Right? So you look at it, and there's moments with Milroe where you go, wow, okay, he's the best athlete on the field. I mean, you look at even the LSU game this year where he just completely took over with his legs. He barely threw over 100 yards in that game because he could just run all over you. If he decides to run at the combine, I would bet he's going to run at least a 4.4. It's just ridiculous how good an athlete he is. But I just, without significant development, I think over multiple years, it could take at least 2, if not 3 years to, you mentioned his footwork, the accuracy, the release, and honestly, things just take too long in the pocket. I know you mentioned he can get beyond that first read and create some things because he can. He's best athlete back there, right? You think about guys who can do that like Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels and Josh Allen, and they can get beyond that first read because they know they're the best athlete out there. But with Milroe, the lack of accuracy, the lack of processing, and outside of the first half of the Georgia game, the answer became really easy. Just blitz him. Speed him up. Let's go. If you can't even get there in 2.5 seconds or less. And if you can't get there in 2.5 or less in the NFL, it's going to be really hard for you to function consistently, right? Because in the NFL, you can't just run away from everybody every single play, right? I think it's even a similar problem that Caleb Williams had this year with the Bears, where it's like you're holding the ball too long. You don't have this much time. So, I wanted to see him at the Senior Bowl go out and do the fundamental things that NFL quarterbacks do from the pocket, and he really didn't succeed that week at all in those aspects. So I think there is a ton to work on. If you take him in a safe space where he can develop over multiple years. I don't even think this is a sit 1 year situation. No. I think this could take 2 or 3 years to get him to function within the pocket at an NFL level. There's no question about his mobility, but he's also not even built like a Josh Allen or like an Anthony Richardson, right? He came in at 6'1", I think it was, and now everybody's making a thing about the really small hand size, and maybe that's why, Trevor was saying that maybe that's why so many balls get airmailed. They get thrown high, right? I think that's where I see most of his inaccuracies is overthrows and balls being thrown high, in part because, he's got to just rip everything to be accurate too. He doesn't throw with a whole lot of touch. So when you go in and you look at the tools and how he has taken games over at the college level, there is a ceiling there. There's a major athletic ceiling there. But you also start to dig in play by play and even game to game. I think about even a game like the Oklahoma game where I'm just like, it's just lost.
Yeah.
It was completely lost in that game, and because he just doesn't have it in him yet to get rid of the football quicker and with better footwork and with better accuracy. So there's a long way to go in his development, I think, if he's going to be an NFL caliber starter. If a team, again, the other part for me is where does he fit in? Should he be the Ravens' backup and just sit behind Lamar and do it that way with going that route with Lamar and Todd Monken teaching him? Is it the Bills? Is it the Bills with Josh Allen and Joe Brady and try to get him in rhythm? Is it where is this fit where you go, okay, we can develop a guy like Milroe? Because I think if he's your quarterback, if he's your starting quarterback, you have to tailor your offense to him now.
Yeah.
You can't just throw, say, like what Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow do in Cincinnati on Jalen Milroe and expect him to succeed like that, right? So I think there's a long way to go in his development. That's why I have him lower, because I think a lot of the things you need to be a functional NFL quarterback are kind of lacking right now.
Yeah, his processing speed. So he does a good job of getting through his reads, but not at a quick enough speed. Like you said, he had a 3.4 second average time to throw last year, and then this past year a little bit faster, but still 2.9 seconds. And usually you want to get down to like 2.5 second range if you can. So he's still about a half second off that even. So processing speed is still not there. Again, I think there is a ceiling with him that I'm going with over some other guys in this class and over a guy like you mentioned before in Quinn Ewers, where I think there is a ceiling there with Quinn Ewers. One, I think Jalen Milroe's ceiling is higher, and two, I just think Milroe's played better.
And there are always higher time to throw guys who succeed. Allen's up there, Mahomes is up there, right? Jalen Hurts this year, I mean, he just won a Super Bowl with the highest average time to throw in the league. But they also had the best offensive line in the league and the most loaded team in the league, right? And they allowed him the time and space to be able to do that. So I think it needs to be, even what Hurts is at I think he was averaging around 3.2. That's stretching it. If you're getting over 3 at an NFL level, you're really stretching it. You really better be special, but that's why Jalen Hurts has won a Super Bowl. That's why Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson have won MVPs, and Mahomes has 3 Super Bowls. Those guys that are up in that range, you have to be absolutely special. And the other thing is those guys now, at this stage in their development, they're special from the pocket too. It is balanced out, along with the playmaking. So Milroe, he's got a long way to go in his development from the pocket.
Yeah, and I think another reason why I had him at number 4 was because there's a lot of guys in the 3 through 10 range I just don't think have the ceiling to be NFL starter. Milroe has that ceiling, which is why I put him at number 4. But like I am with you though, it's gonna take a while for him to develop. And you mentioned before the hand size, he came in with 8 3/4 inch hands, which is below the 9-inch threshold that a lot of teams have in the NFL. And Trevor was saying it, I thought really what the Senior Bowl was like, yeah, I mean, for him to have such a good arm, because usually when you have a bigger hand size, it's easier for you to rocket balls in. He's such a twitched up athlete that he has to do that to make up for the smaller hands, right? Which leads to accuracy issues. When you're throwing at 100 miles an hour every single time, you're probably not going to be as accurate all the time, right? So that's another thing to keep an eye on with Jalen Milroe with his hand size as well. But again, there is a ceiling there with Milroe, but there's a long way to go in his development. But I do think that at the best possible outcome, he is a starting quarterback in the NFL. I can't say the same for a lot of the other guys we talked about on this list, which is why I had him number 4 for me. Who should we have to go to next on for you?
Who do you have there at number 3? I think that seems to be a hot name right now. If it is who I'm pretty.
Let's get to him. I think next. Let's go over your number 3 guy. I think the guy I'm going to go over at number 3 has been the guy everyone's been debating recently.
Okay.
So we'll get to him before we get to the top 2. But who is your number 3 guy?
National championship winning Ohio State quarterback Will Howard.
Yep.
And I think a big part of this is. I think Will Howard, of any quarterback on this list, in this draft, or maybe even in the entire country, this is a testament to what Chip Kelly did with Howard throughout this entire year and how he developed him, because he comes from Kansas State. It's a big run-heavy school that runs a lot of option. They're pulling guys all over the place. We're always talking about they're running for 300 yards a week, right? And it was heavily dependent on play action. Let's just say it straight up. Before this year at Ohio State, Will Howard was not a very good drop-back passer.
No.
And he wasn't in a place where they do that.
Yeah.
We said it all year on this show. We know exactly what Kansas State is. And if you can make them drop back and throw the football, they're probably going to lose. That was the case with Will Howard. It was the case with Avery Johnson this year, right? The only time I think saw him in drop-back situations play really well was I think the second half of last year's Texas game, ironically enough, where they had to come back from down 20-something points, and he darn near did it. He brought that game to overtime, but it was really inconsistent, right? And I think what you have in Howard is a guy who developed so well under Chip Kelly this year that by the end of the year, and you saw it through the title run, it was just hard to ignore, right? And you get to the national title game. He had his highest graded game of his career against Notre Dame, maybe the best secondary in the country, in the national title game. He played a perfect game. Did he not? Did he make any bad throws in that?
I don't remember.
I don't know that I don't think he made a single bad throw within that game, and very few throughout the entire playoff run. And I think what you have with Will Howard, one, he's extremely tough. That was evident at K-State. That was evident at Ohio State. This is a tough dude who has the intangibles and just has the want to win football games right now. Do I think there are limitations with his arm? Yeah, I don't think he has the strongest arm in this class. I don't think he's got the arm talent of a Quinn Ewers or a Jalen Milroe, right? But I think by the end of this season, so impressed with his footwork and his accuracy. Ryan Day, I remember, said it himself. He goes, when Will Howard's footwork is right, he's as accurate as anybody. And I agree with that. It showed. I mean, you saw a variety of throws, and even though he doesn't maybe have the consistent ability to drive balls, say, to the opposite hash, to the outside, that's always what you look for, Chip Kelly did a great job of designing outside throws that fit him, right? And you saw them taking their deep shots in the playoff. Now, it helps to have Jeremiah Smith out there. That's certainly something we'll talk about the next couple of years, but he's a solid athlete who can run the ball a little bit. Is he maybe a tad slower than Riley Leonard? Yeah, but I think he's got the same level of toughness, and he can get a handful of carries a game too. And I think just his command of the offense and the level of accuracy that in the drop-back game we never saw at K-State, the fact that Chip Kelly developed them the way that he did this year, and he's the one guy, I would say, of all the guys we've talked about so far, who I just haven't seen him fold. I haven't seen him fold really at all. I don't think you just go back to this year and even the Michigan game, right? They just couldn't block a soul. It's hard. I know he made a couple mistakes in that game, but they just couldn't block anybody. So, and you're talking about going against Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and all those freaks up front. At a certain point, we're sitting here saying, what is he supposed to do, right? That was rock bottom for Ohio State. They had no pass protection. I think Howard, the combination of his development this year under Chip Kelly, the absolute toughness he plays. You talk about Riley Leonard and toughness. Will Howard's in that same category. And just, again, his command and his vision of the offense and what Chip Kelly taught him and how to make his reads against a defense. Look, I think Will Howard I have him QB3. There's still a huge gap between him and the first two. I still think Will Howard doesn't go before probably the third round. But I think if you're looking for a guy with intangibles, accuracy, and a little bit of athleticism that you could develop into even maybe a functional starter, depending on the system and how you tailor it, I think it could work. I think if you talk about maybe
I was gonna say, yeah,
maybe
Vegas.
If Chip Kelly brings him with him to the Raiders, well, here's the thing, just throwing it out there, Pete Carroll made a pretty good pick in a third-round quarterback one time too, about a decade ago. So I mean, it's a thought. He doesn't necessarily have to get his guy in the top 10, right? So you've got Chip Kelly sitting there. Is it the Raiders? Is it a team maybe like the Browns in the third or fourth round that go, okay, maybe maybe he's mobile. He kind of fits in with Kevin Stefanski. Is there another team that feels like maybe the Rams again, like you mentioned, or Seattle, where you go, we could develop this guy into something because it's there. The intangibles are there. There's enough athletic talent there. The arm, it's decent. It's not going to be an elite level velocity arm, but I think the biggest thing for me is he's just the one guy more than a lot of these that just he never folded. And the fact that he never folded got Ohio State a national title because we've said it 100 times. We came into this year going, okay, Ohio State should probably win the title. But is Will Howard good enough in the pocket? And he was. He proved it to us. And the only thing I have is like, okay, yeah, he had the receivers, but you still got to make the throws against really good defenses. I like Howard. Again, I don't think it's anywhere close to the first two guys on the list, but he's the one guy where I go, you know what? For that run and what he did in crunch time, I'm going to put him in that third spot.
All right, I appreciate that. I have him, like I said, a little bit lower. I have him 7th on my list, but this 2024 season was him giving a big middle finger to everyone in college football, honestly, because a lot of people said, and we even said, Dalton, in our preseason video for Ohio State, saying, okay, they have the roster to win a national title, but do they have the quarterback? And he, and a lot of times this year, was the reason why they won games. Where we thought Ohio State, if they won a national title, they'd win it in spite of Will Howard. They actually won it because of him in a lot of games. You mentioned the amazing game he had in the national title game, 9th best passing grade in the country this past season, and his passing grade without play action improved to 82.5 this year. It was 61 at Kansas State the year before. Very good athlete, nearly a 97th percentile gas score, 755 rushing yards over the last 2 years. Very catchable football, 10th best uncatchable pass rate this past year, and really, really good pocket presence as well, with about a 13% pressure to sack rate over the last 2 years. Now, there's too often I found on his tape and why I have him a little bit lower. He had a 3.3% turnover play rate over the last 2 years. It's 80th in college football. Too often just misses defenders at times, I thought, out there. Again, you mentioned before, he's a good, not great arm. And I do think at Kansas State, there are questions of, okay, how good is he outside the scheme? At Ohio State, I think there still is a question of, okay, how good he is without Jeremiah Smith and then without Emeka Egbuka and all the weapons they had at Ohio State as well. Again, utilized a lot of play action at Kansas State. He had incredible talent at Ohio State alongside a great offensive coordinator in Ryan Day, who put him in great positions as well. But Will Howard was outstanding this year. There's no denying it. He proved everyone very, very wrong. He throws with great timing, great anticipation. There's a lot of throws, I remember, in that Texas game where when he threw it, I thought he was going to get picked off because there was nobody there. But in fact, he was exactly on time and exactly perfect in that game. So I was so impressed by him this year. But I do still think there are some questions with him based off how good he is independent of talent and scheme. I think he's a long-term backup who can do well in a scheme that utilizes a lot of play action. But I do think there is, again, I like him a lot. I think he's going to be a long-term backup. But I just think there are some questions there with the high turnover play rate and the fact that at Kansas State he had a really, really good scheme that put him in great positions, and Ohio State obviously he was also put in a great position with all the insane talent and the scheme that Chip Kelly threw up to.
It's the part you mentioned about non-play action. I mean, and look here, I'm going to go. You want Power 4 quarterback grades if we're going from week 11 all the way through the end of the season. Passing grade: Kyle McCord, Cam Ward, Will Howard. And I just never, I think through that run, I never thought Will Howard could get to that point as a passer. Now, you mentioned it. Fantastic weapons. 2 guys likely to be taken in the first round, one this year, one in 2027. That helps. I mean, but also in the NFL, nobody complains when Hurts has Brown and Smith.
Right, yeah.
Burrow's had Chase and Higgins. I mean, great quarterbacks often have great receivers. That's not a crime, right? So I think the other thing is, like, when you have those questions, at K-State, we really questioned his ability to do so, right? If we're questioning just the talent around him at Ohio State, well, C.J. Stroud was there, Justin Fields was there, right? I think he answered the questions about being able to run an NFL-style passing game, especially under Chip Kelly. I think that's the big thing, and it's the reason it makes me wonder if the Raiders would go ahead and wait till the third round. They have 2 third-round picks. They could burn one. and go ahead and draft him and go, okay, he already understands this offense. Maybe not even as the starter right away. Maybe they still sign a Russell Wilson or a Sam Darnold or something like that, but have him around because he knows the offense, right? And I think it's a better understanding that he got this year of NFL passing concepts, which are just not existing at Kansas State. Right, it's the same reason when you get ahead of Kansas State and they still have Avery Johnson, that he struggles there. Will Howard was the same thing. If you got ahead of him, that system is just not. It doesn't allow you to drop back and throw the football effectively like that. So, again, if you're playing the ceiling card, there are other quarterbacks, maybe Ewers, maybe Milroe, maybe even Jaxson Dart, who have higher ceilings. But I think his ability to function this year within the scope of Ohio State's offense and what it was makes him attractive in somewhere in the third or fourth round in this draft.
Ironically, I have him below the former Ohio State quarterback, Kyle McCord. I just think McCord, first of all, is a year younger. Also, I thought he played better than Will Howard this year, and there was a lot more pressure on McCord at Syracuse than Will Howard at Ohio State. And the weapons for Kyle McCord, I thought, were obviously not nearly as good as they were. So obviously there are some people going to say, well, listen, Will Howard won a natty at Ohio State.
Hey, you're about to rile up the Ohio State
I know I am.
Now,
I know I am.
That's why I didn't. If you're gonna compare the two guys, the Ohio State people are going to go, well, under the same pressure, Howard won the whole thing.
With a worse, Kyle McCord had a worse roster. We could agree on that, though.
At Ohio State?
Yes.
I mean, it wasn't that different. I know.
You have everyone that came back for another year. You bring in Jeremiah Smith. You bring in Chip Kelly.
Kyle had Marvin Harrison.
I know that, but you bring in Chip Kelly, you bring back everyone for another year as well. And I think Kyle McCord, listen, if you say the same at Syracuse, then I'll be like, yeah, Will Howard's better. But he also radically changed who he was at Syracuse.
No, he did. So it's hard to even make that comparison. And McCord, he was just fine with them losing to Michigan again. But I think they're also very different players. And some of this we're going to talk about at every position. Some of it does come down to preference, because what Howard's athleticism brings, McCord just doesn't have that.
Yeah,
right? And
I agree with
that was also a different dimension where you can do a few more things with Howard than McCord. So these are always the arguments that go on in draft rooms, right? Where two guys may be of equal talent, but they're also of different talent. You can't run an offense with Will Howard the same way you can with Kyle McCord or with Jalen Milroe or with whoever, right? It's completely so. It's always about having a plan for a guy. But I think Howard, he certainly showed me a lot. It was the improvement from what we used to see at K-State in 1 year at Ohio State, and what better place to do it. I think that tells me a lot about how he could at least function at an NFL level.
All right, so you have Will Howard QB3 in this draft. I'm going to go with my QB3. That is Jaxson Dart. Now, I want to remind people here, our QB3 through 10, Dalton and I will not touch, and I mean not touch, in the first round of an NFL draft. So because I have Jaxson Dart QB3 does not mean I am with the Jaxson Dart top 10 pick, Jaxson Dart first round pick. However, I do like Jaxson Dart, and I do think there's something there, and he's worth a second, probably third round pick in the NFL draft. What I like about him, he's as efficient as they come over the last couple of years. Back-to-back 90-plus grades at Ole Miss, 91.9 passing grade this past year, the best in college football. Has shown multiple high-level NFL throws on his tape. 7.1% big-time throw rate this year, second best in the Power 4. Only DJ Lagway had a better big-time throw rate than Jaxson Dart. Also, about a 2% turnover-worthy play rate, was top 25 in college football at that as well. Very dangerous on the ground, too. Over 1,200 rushing yards over the last 2 years. Now, why is Jaxson Dart, with those elite grades and all those elite numbers, why is he not being talked about in the same breath as Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders at the top of the NFL draft? My big question, I think your big question, and I think the big question for Jaxson Dart in general, how much of it is the system? Because at Ole Miss, it's very one read or take off and run. He had a 71.1 passing grade when moved off his first read this year. That was 44th in college football. Looked very uncomfortable under center at the Senior Bowl as well. He had multiple drop snaps at the Senior Bowl under center because he's never done it before at Ole Miss, really. Pocket presence could use a lot of work as well. 19% pressure to sack conversion rate since 2023. And I think his tools are solid, but it's nothing special. So there's a lot of guys that you say, okay, Yeah, it's a lot of bit of the system, but he has the tools that, man, if we could teach him how to be an NFL quarterback, he could be a really high ceiling. I think the tools for Jaxson Dart are good. They're not great, though, right? They're not like a Jalen Milroe where you go, okay, yes, there's a lot of work to be done with Jalen Milroe, but if you hit the ceiling with him, there is a high ceiling. I think his raw numbers and even his advanced numbers paint a first-round quarterback on the same level as Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, but you have to add the context in of the Lane Kiffin offense that makes his projection a lot murkier in the NFL draft. I think it'll likely take him a year or two on the bench to understand how to run an NFL offense, how to understand how to get through his progressions. But I think that makes him a day 2 pick at best, likely in the 3rd round, I think, in the NFL draft. So I like Jaxson Dart. Again, the numbers at both standard in terms of passing yards and passing touchdowns are great, and PFF numbers are outstanding as well. But I think you need the context of the Lane Kiffin offense, because you even see guys before like Matt Corral coming in from the Ole Miss offense or under Lane Kiffin, and he struggles in the NFL, even though he put up ridiculous numbers PFF-wise at Ole Miss. I think he's a little bit better than Matt Corral, but I still think the context of Lane Kiffin's offense and how much really hand-holding there is for a quarterback in that offense, it makes his projection a lot murkier than I think some draft analysts are letting on right now.
There's a couple of things I have with this. You mentioned Lane Kiffin in the system, and really the entire idea is just to, through formations, create as many one-on-one matchups as possible, right? There's a whole lot of 4 verticals in this offense. You saw consistently throughout 3 years at Ole Miss, take away the deep ball, and all of a sudden Ole Miss's offense just stops, right? We saw it this year when Trey Harris got hurt against LSU. Their offense just kind of ceased to function. He had 4 turnover-worthy plays in that game. Every year that he plays Georgia or he plays Alabama, the deep ball just goes away. Even in this year's Georgia game, where Ole Miss won the game, who put together the best drive of the game for Ole Miss?
Austin Simmons.
It was Austin Simmons who came in and when Jaxson Dart turned his ankle and then he missed a drive and came back in the game, right? You know, and I just look at those 2 things put together. You take away the deep ball, both from Dart and from that offense, and suddenly there's a huge problem, right? And I just, at no point did I ever see him really dominate a top-notch defense.
Yeah.
At no point. I look at his 5 highest graded games of the season, all right? Furman, okay, that should happen. Georgia Southern, that should happen. Arkansas, whose secondary was just awful. Okay, I know it's an SEC team, and their secondary was awful. Middle Tennessee and Florida, whose secondary was just awful. That's his 5 highest graded games. And I think this is a part to me where I go, when he was playing a good defense that took away the deep shots, the home run balls, there wasn't a whole lot else left. And yes, it's in part, it's the scheme. It's Lane Kiffin and them being – it's very stubborn when it comes to that, when it's like, okay, you don't have the home runs. We have to do something else. And it just felt like they just never did. And I don't know if that's because Dart couldn't adjust or if that's because Lane was refusing to adjust, but it's been the same problem over and over. And why Ole Miss can't get over the hump is you take away the deep shots, and they don't have a whole lot else. They don't have a whole lot else left. They didn't run the ball well this year, so they really needed Dart to make all those in-between throws, and they just didn't come at a consistent level, and that's why they missed the playoff. And then, the one game, against Florida this year where he made a ton of big-time throws, well, they dropped them all. So, it just did not work fully for Ole Miss at any point. But you mentioned it. Look, he's a young kid. He's got 3 years of good starting experience under his belt. He's going to only be 22 years old. I think you're right in the sense of this being a draft and develop guy. But, when you have offenses like this and quarterbacks that come from offenses like this, I think about all these Tennessee quarterbacks. So have we heard Hendon Hooker's name at all? It says a lot that even, say, the Lions signed Teddy Bridgewater to be their backup in a playoff game after coaching for the entire season in high school in Miami, where you go, okay, maybe there's such a big gap between what they run in college and NFL-level schemes, right? So I have him QB7. I think Trevor has him even lower than that. You have him up at 3. A lot of people have him up at 3 right now. I'm not really sure where this sudden rocket ship for Jaxson Dart came from. I know he tore up Duke in the bowl game, but that's precisely the type of game he succeeds in.
Again, I have him QB3, but with a caveat of I would not take him till the 3rd round.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that's that defines this class. But I just go. This is someone who the stats and again, he had the highest passing grade in the country.
Yeah.
But to me, I watch him and I never felt like he was the best quarterback in the country, right? I think he is good, but to me, as someone who was the believer in Zach Wilson a few years back, I think Wilson was clearly more talented then than Dart is now. I think he's got a better arm. I think he might even be a better athlete, and he made a greater variety of throws at BYU. The thing with Wilson was he was just never under pressure at all. He was playing 7-on-7 because I think that BYU team had one of the highest pass blocking grades ever. But yeah. I think it's draft and develop. It's not. I think if Jaxson Dart goes in somewhere and is starting day one,
you're in trouble.
As some are projecting, I think you're taking a huge gamble. Because I'm not sure he's ready to make those in-between throws. And again, we talk about guys like Patrick Mahomes who made that adjustment after Tyreek Hill left, and Josh Allen not being so, just the gunslinger that he is, right? And I know Dart has never had a huge turnover-worthy play problem. It's 2.2% this year, which is pretty darn good. But I look at like the average depth of targets. This year's average depth of target is almost 12 yards. Can't function like that in the NFL. That's the only other guy I can think of who had it in that range in the NFL is Will Levis. That doesn't work. So he's got to adjust to NFL-style offenses. I think it's going to take a pretty decent adjustment. He has tools. I also thought at Senior Bowl week he looked kind of average. I didn't see, especially got better on the third day of practice, but it wasn't. I don't think there's anything there that blew me away. I'm not sure. To me, I'm not sure where everyone's being blown away with Jaxson Dart right now. I really don't get it.
No, I don't either. And something else I want to bring up with Jaxson Dart is you look at what Trey Harris did this year, and a lot of people are using the yards per route run for Trey Harris as a reason why he should be a first-round pick. Well, he averaged, 5.15 yards per route run at Ole Miss this year, which is a ridiculous rate. That's actually the highest we've ever seen in college football. Now, does that mean Trey Harris was not fantastic? He was, but one of the big reasons why that rate was so high, Dalton, he was the first read on every play, and they don't move off the first read at Ole Miss. They really don't. Like, Jaxson Dart either throws to his first read or he takes off and runs. And when Trey Harris went down with an injury, guess what happened then? Caden Lee started putting up 150 yards every week as well.
What's funny is, even though Harris is great, and I know we're digging into college stuff here, but it looked like their offense functioned better when Trey Harris was hurt, because they were forced to not just throw the deep balls all the time, which was my biggest complaint, right? And you look at Trey Harris's numbers, and he teed off on all of the bad secondaries on their schedule, so that throws a wrench in it. But I just don't, with Dart, you don't get to the NFL level and throw home runs for an entire game. And that's what this Ole Miss offense, that was their goal. We're gonna move around formations. Even a team, when they lost to Kentucky, and they scored, what did they score in that game? 17 points or something?
Yeah.
That's all Kentucky had to do. And Kentucky was a game that they were a team that only won 3 or 4 games this year, and they just went, well, as long as we take away the home run balls, we'll be fine. And they only hit maybe 1 or 2 of them the entire game. That's the part that concerns me, is I just go, okay, what can he do beyond just running 4 verts in that offense? Because that's essentially what that offense is. It's run the ball, play with tempo, run 4 verts, hope somebody wins a one-on-one. And NFL football is a lot more complicated than that.
Again, like I said before, just the fact that one receiver feels like in every game put up massive numbers. It didn't really matter who it was. Like Jordan
Watkins against Arkansas. I mean, they set records that day against Arkansas. But
250 yards in that game. Trey Harris was putting up ridiculous numbers. And then when he got hurt, it's like just that. I think, again, that yes, they were very good receivers, but I think that speaks more to Ole Miss's offense being like, hey, you're throwing to this guy, and if he's not open, run. That was a lot of what Jaxson Dart's tape was. Again, I do like him a lot. I do think he played outstanding football in that system over the last couple of years at Ole Miss. But I have him QB3. I still would not take him until day 2 at the best.
Yeah, and even a team like Arkansas, 118th in the country in coverage grade.
Yeah,
they were giving that up to everybody. So I again, against better competition and against teams that took away the deep ball, that's where I'd be concerned. And at the NFL level, there's only 3 or 4 teams every year that are going to give you deep balls. So I think about the Raiders this year, right, where it's like that's the first thing you have to do in coverage is not get absolutely torched deep. Beyond that, that's when you have to start figuring things out.
There's some people in here. One guy, TCCA, on our comments are saying he got limited from lane system. That might be true. But like the problem is like you're trying to project what he is right now, and you don't know what he is outside of the system.
And you still have to progress him out of that. That's why he's just like the rest of these guys we've talked about so far. He's another draft and develop guy.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a day one starter by any means. I think if I don't know, the Jets or Pittsburgh or some other teams in the first round were to go ahead and go, yeah, this is our guy, this is our day one starter, I think they'd be making a huge mistake.
Absolutely. So, Dalton, we have been wildly different on QB 3 through 10. My QB 3 was your QB 7.
Yep.
Your QB 3 was my QB 7. Your QB 4 was my QB 8. Everything from 3 through 10 has been insanely different. And you have the hot take of Shedeur Sanders being QB1 in this draft, when I think everyone pretty much has Cam Ward. Well, I actually am with you. I also have Shedeur Sanders QB1 in the draft over Cam Ward. But let's go over Cam Ward first before we get to our QB1 collectively in Shedeur Sanders. What do you like about Cam Ward?
About Cam Ward, okay, first and foremost, well, he's got swagger, doesn't he?
Yep.
He's just that leader with swagger that you want on a football field. He really is a field general, and I think we were lucky enough to go watch him on the field at Louisville in that shootout game this year, and even through all the adversity that he's been through in his career, and I think that's where it starts is, being a wing T quarterback in high school, and I coached in that system, and wing T coaches, if they get their choice, they would rather not throw the ball a single time throughout the whole game. So it's an offense that actively tries not to throw the ball. Goes down to Incarnate Word is fantastic. Goes to Washington State, shows flashes, right? And I think, what you get from Cam Ward is a bit more of a gunslinger than Shedeur Sanders, right? I think there's times where I watch him and I see there's a little bit of Caleb Williams in there too, where, good and bad, where the improvised stuff can be fantastic. We saw that all this season, and we've seen that throughout his career. Where you question him a bit is you go, okay, as his career has gone on, and especially this year down at Miami, gotten pretty casual back there in the pocket, right? And you could see, if you go back even to the Incarnate Word tape, because hell yeah, we have that, he did a little bit better job with his footwork being a little tighter and throwing in rhythm. I think as he's really started to feel himself a little more at Miami, he's felt like, okay, I'm in control here, which is part of the fun, right? It's like you have a guy who's in total control and knows it. And he did rein it in a little bit this year. I will say, though, if you look at his turnover-worthy play rate this year against Power 5 teams, I think it's identical to what it was last year at Washington State. So there are times late in plays where he does make you a little nervous, right? He's loose with the football, a lot of fumbles. I think it's something like 40-something fumbles in his career, right? I think about plays like the throw all the way back across the field against Cal that was just inexplicable, right? But you talk about a guy who's unafraid to make throws from the pocket in tight spaces and down the field, there's almost nobody better, right? I mean, you talk about he's at least comparable with the top guys. He's maybe the top guy when it comes to slinging it downfield early in the count. Now we start talking about a guy who can do things when he's in rhythm under 2.5 seconds. He wants to let it rip vertically. I think that's what it is. He's a vertical passer who can move. And if you want that sort of thing, if you want to really open up your offense down the field with a guy like this and tighten up the footwork a little bit on the quick throws, because he's not the most accurate passer. Shedeur is more consistently accurate than him, because Cam can be loose with his mechanics now sometimes, but unbelievable downfield passer. And there's some tight window throws on tape where you're just like, that's
stupid.
That's not normal. Yeah, there's guys who can't make that level of velocity and touch combined. Not much of that did you see in this draft.
And I think, and listen, the top two is pretty clear for both of us. And I think pretty clear for almost everyone is Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. I think we can both agree that even though we have Sanders QB1, Cam Ward does have a higher ceiling than Shedeur Sanders.
I would say, like, physically, when you think about the arm talent and the ability to move, not that Shedeur can't improvise some, but Cam, it comes more natural to him, right? I think the physical talent leans towards Cam a little bit, and even like when you look at on a board, if people have Cam Ward 1, I don't complain. I get it.
No, I totally get it as well. Yeah, I totally get it. If Tennessee takes him number 1 overall, I get it as well. He was the best quarterback in college football this past year. 92.6 PFF grade, the best in the country. Most valuable player in the nation according to PFF's wins above average metric. 31 big time throws, second in the country. He's got the arm to make it from make any throw from any angle. Became much more efficient than ever before. He was actually top 20 in the nation in adjusted completion rate this year, which is your completion percentage plus any drops your receivers have. Despite having an average depth of target of nearly 10 yards, he was pushing the ball downfield and was still very, very accurate this year as well. And you mentioned his demeanor, so cool, so calm, so collected, plays a very nonchalant play style. He led multiple double-digit comebacks for Miami this year. He had a 25-point comeback against Cal and a 10-point comeback with under 9 minutes left against Virginia Tech. Just even when it looks like Miami's got no chance, I mean, he's got ice in his veins, man. And that play style, which has been an issue for him at sometimes, there's a lot more good than bad with Cam Ward with that nonchalant play style. But the bad with it is that he's very nonchalant in the pocket. That's led to a pretty high pressure to sack rate over the last 2 years, a 21% pressure to sack rate over the last couple of seasons. And you mentioned it before, he's still a little bit of a gunslinger, right? 64th in the country with a 3.3% turnover-worthy play rate and 39 turnover-worthy plays over the last 2 years, tied for the most in the Power Four. He has a bit of a fumbling problem in his career, kind of cleaned it up a little bit here at Miami, but it was a big issue at Washington State. He made a ton of money because last year he actually declared for the 2024 NFL draft and then pulled out of it at the last second and decided to transfer over to Miami. And he went from a guy who's going to be a day 3 pick in the NFL draft to one that's probably not going to make it out of the top 5 of this year's draft. There's still a bit of overconfidence that I think is in his game right now that gets him into trouble between, holding onto the ball for a little bit in the pocket, between, making throws he just should not be making and leads to turnover play because of it. But there are serious tools to work with, and he showed dramatic improvement at Miami this past year. And I think my comparison for him, Dalton, is Jordan Love. I see a lot of Jordan Love in his game where, there are unbelievable throws on his tape, but still a little bit of overconfidence in his arm. And sometimes I think he reminded me a lot of Jordan Love when I was watching Cam Ward.
I think even, and Matt LaFleur has even talked about Jordan Love's footwork this offseason. It's the feeling that you just wish the fundamentals were more consistent. Because when that guy's fundamentals are consistent, there's no stopping him. That's what we saw. That's what we really saw from Jordan Love in the second half of 2023 was, okay, the footwork's clicking, the timing is clicking, all the fundamentals are right, and in that stretch, he was the highest graded quarterback in football. Cam Ward has that same element where I think there can be a hot and cold element, and I think the number that stands out to me the most now, he's going to get drafted that high because of what he did this year at Miami, right? For his career in college, 102 big-time throws, 97 turnover-worthy plays.
Yep.
This is what you're going to get a gunslinger. Even this year, 18 turnover-worthy plays, only turned into 7 interceptions, right? And I know we've mentioned before he's fumbled a lot in his career. It's going to be that. How do you match? It's really this. Jordan Love's a great mention, too. And I think Caleb, this even, again, times in his game where I'm like, there's a little bit of Caleb in there. But how do you balance the bravery with the recklessness, right? Because the bravery is something that makes him what he is, the ability to make any play, right? The swagger to lead his team and be down, whatever you mentioned against Cal, was it 25 points against Cal, the biggest comeback in school history, I believe it was. You go to have that swagger and that level of leadership and confidence is a huge part of his game you don't want to take away, but turnovers in the NFL kill you.
Yeah.
Even in this past Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes with the 2 big interceptions, that's when the game really turned, was those 2 plays. You can't be that loose with the football. And even this year, there were moments where it was like, Cam, come on now. We know you know what you're doing out here, but still, and there was a few he got away with. But no, he was fantastic all this season. I mean, he has all the talent in the world. I think that is a great call on Jordan Love. For me, it's the casual attitude at times. Even we saw it in the very first game against Florida, right? Remember getting over towards the sideline and just walking out of bounds. I'm like, okay, you're believing. Okay, I get it. And listen, he went out and had a great season fitting of that. But it's things like that in the NFL where I would like to see him get back to, okay, the fundamentals and the things in between. Because the ball placement is more solid than elite, for sure. I mean, and there are times where the accuracy, some of the big-time throws are off the charts. But, again, consistently making the easy throws. Who can do that? Look at all the greatest guys in the league right now. Allen's gotten way better at it. Burrow's the master of it. Mahomes is a master of it. Consistently making the easy throws is what allows you to make those great throws later on.
And I know we're sometimes criticizing some of the arrogance that he has in his game, but at the same time,
it's a part of it.
To be a great quarterback, you need to be a little arrogant. Yeah. Right? You need to be like, hey, I'm the guy here. I'm the number one guy, and he's proven that at Miami. So I do love that part of his game, but like I said, it is a little bit of a double-edged sword when you play with a lot of, that's a great way to put it, bravery and recklessness. There is a lot of that.
And there were moments, I will cut him some slack because He's never played with a good defense.
No.
Not at Wazoo.
So it's like Caleb thing, too. It's like, I need to score 50.
He has to carry it. And at no point, despite what we're talking about, at no point did Miami fail this year because of Cam Ward. The Georgia Tech loss, he completed, 64% with 3 touchdowns. The Syracuse loss, he threw 2 touchdowns. He was spectacular in that game, a 92.4 passing grade. They lost because of their defense.
Yep.
That's the only shame of it is I really, really wish we would have got to see him in the playoff for as much as it was a great win for Kyle McCord and Syracuse. But that would have been fun to watch him play, say, somebody like a Texas or Ohio State or a team like that, just to see at what level he could get to against a team like that.
So we are going against consensus. We have Cam Ward at number 2 on our list, but number 1 for us is Shedeur Sanders. And Dawn, I personally put him number 1. Just 4 years of outstanding production, whether it be at Jackson State or at Colorado. 80-plus PFF grade in all 4 years. His grade improved every single year as a starter as well. He reads defenses like an NFL quarterback already. He is a pure distributor of the football. I mentioned before how this is a negative with Jaxson Dart, how he really locks on to one receiver. Every mouth is fed when Shedeur Sanders is playing quarterback for Colorado. Incredibly accurate to all levels of the field. His touch is spectacular. Second best uncatchable pass rate over the last 2 years. Only Bo Nix was better. And Bo Nix threw the ball underneath a lot more than Shedeur Sanders did. And even Bo Nix had a great year for the Broncos this year. Does not put the ball in harm's way at all. 1.3% turnover-worthy play rate over the last 2 years. Again, only Bo Nix was lower than Shedeur Sanders. Incredibly poised despite taking a ton of hits from his offensive line. Clutch factor, too. There's not another quarterback in college football that you want in a 2-minute drill than Shedeur Sanders. Dalton, he has a 94 PFF grade on 2-minute drill at Colorado. That's the best in the nation by 2 points over the last 2 years. He was easily the best quarterback in the country in 2-minute drills. Now, the negatives. Pocket presence needs a lot of work. He was not a very... So listen, the O-line was not very good. Sanders also was not a very easy quarterback to block for. This is kind of the issue with Caleb Williams, where yes, the USC offensive line had some issues, but also he was not an easy quarterback to block for either at USC. Little bit of that for Shedeur Sanders at Colorado as well. We charted 168 pressures this year were his fault. Easily the most in college football. He drifts too often in the pocket. He makes it very hard for his offensive linemen to continuously hold up in protection. He's kind of average under pressure as well. His arm strength is just average. I think he wins more with his touch more than pure velocity or distance. He can still get the ball where it needs to go, but he doesn't have the arm to compensate if he's late, which is very rare. And also, he's a solid enough athlete to scramble when he needs to, but not necessarily a true rushing threat at the position. He's an average athlete, I think, overall for the position. So top-end physical traits are not there for Shedeur Sanders, but he plays a very, very clean game, does not force the issue, despite the entire offense and the entire team is relying on him. They don't run the ball at all at Colorado. So you would think that a guy who thinks, okay, I need to win, again, like Cam Ward and other guys, I need to win this game for us, there would be a little more recklessness in his game. There is no recklessness in Shedeur Sanders' game. Very, very high floor player. He reads defenses at an expert level already. I think he'll be a long-term starter in the NFL. Again, why have him QB1 over Cam Ward, even though I think Ward is a higher ceiling? I think Sanders' floor is higher than Cam Ward. So that's why he's my QB1.
Just want to fix that allowed pressure number real quick. So he was pressured 168 total times this year and led the country responsible for 44 of those.
Oh, 44, right, yes, yeah.
44 of those and 17 sacks. Those are both most in the country. And being responsible for 26% of his own pressures is the 11th highest rate in the country. So you're right. And I think there's kind of a debate about this. I don't think it's that he's a slow processor, right? And I seriously believe that he wants to throw the ball in rhythm, right? I think he wants to, but you mentioned it. Zero balance in that Colorado offense.
No.
Just none, right? And even times when they tried to run the ball, they just couldn't. They just couldn't do it, right? They asked so much out of him. Now, I think he's the most NFL-ready quarterback right now. I think between the accuracy, you mentioned it, his processing, his ability to read defenses, and in any game, knowing what he needs to do to win the football game, right? If it has to be a more conservative level of passing, I think about games like, the Texas Tech game, I think is one. I think, the Cincinnati game when they're doing all that drop 8, I think you just have to play with what's given to you, right? And then there's times when he knows he needs to let it rip and take advantage. Obviously, it helps to have number 12 on the outside out there. But, no, I think the way you knew despite a lot of the variables with Colorado, with the lack of a run game, with maybe the run defense shows up this week, maybe it doesn't, right? All the variables, you knew what Shedeur Sanders was going to be every week, right? He was going to be accurate. He was rarely going to put the ball in danger. Remember my stat last year about how Jaden Daniels had the best turnover-worthy play rate for anyone in the Power Four in their career?
Yeah.
Well, Sanders broke that record. So, I mean, you're talking about a guy who I think has a very high floor, and you know what you're getting out of him. And, look, the ability to improvise, it's not on the level of Cam Ward or Jaden or Caleb Daniels and those guys, but can do it a little bit. Now, you're right. I think the one thing I would like to see him do, much like I've said about a couple other guys, is step up vertically into the pocket.
Yeah.
Right? And we know, look, he works a lot with Tom Brady and talks to Tom Brady a lot off to the side. Who was better at it than Tom Brady, right? And I think within the pocket, much like, say, a Drew Brees, if you give him those windows, Shedeur's got very much an over-the-top delivery that can get it over the line of scrimmage. And, you know, for a guy who's probably going to measure in at about 6'1" or so, right? People are going to be concerned, well, can he throw over the middle? Well, he's one of the highest graded quarterbacks throwing over the middle of the field, too. You look at pretty much by any measure over his 2 seasons at Colorado on a team with not a great supporting cast, he was either the best quarterback in the country or in the top 3 to 5 in almost every metric you can find. You get the feeling people are doubting him. Now, they always doubt people with lack of physical tools, right? And even Deion Sanders last week, I think, said on ESPN, look, his weapon is his mind. You guys are buying into all the hype and hating his dad and doing all that, and you're not understanding what he sees from the pocket at an elite level. I could see it. The first game he went, remember the TCU game?
Yeah.
Very first game he was at Colorado. I was like, oh, he sees everything. You could see it. You could just flip it on and go, he sees when it's man, he sees when it's zone, he sees when it's 1 high, 2 high, blitz is coming. And as long as he's protected enough, he's going to make the right throw, and he's rarely going to miss it. So I think, you know, Cam may have the higher ceiling with his physical tools, but I think Shedeur is the most NFL-ready quarterback right now because of pretty much everything we've just said. It's the mind, it's the accuracy, and, you know, tough as nails, too. I mean, we have to think about it was on his shoulders to take the worst team in the Power Four and somehow make them successful. And in 2 years, they went from 1-11 to 9-4.
Yeah.
That says a lot. And it's because of him, and it's obviously because of Travis, too. Those are the 2 main reasons. But you don't just go to a program like that and turn it around that quickly, right? And he got – and look, there were times he got the shit beat out of him, especially the first year, right? And he just keeps getting up, and he's consistently the same guy every single week.
Absolutely. Would you take him number 1 overall for the Tennessee Titans?
Yeah, I would.
I would, too.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I still wonder if Brian Callahan – I know there's been talk about Abdul Carter, there's been talk about Travis Hunter.
You see the Callahan quote where he said there's a lot of Joe Burrow in this game?
Right.
And that's who he coached in Cincinnati as the OC.
Right. It's all this. It's the same traits. It's not quite at the level of Burrow because Burrow had arguably the greatest college season ever.
Oh,
that year at LSU. But it's the same type of thing. It's processing. It's accuracy. It's getting the football to the right spot. And even though he doesn't have A-plus physical tools, we know Burrow can improvise a little bit, right? But he's not Allen or Jackson or whatever. Getting the ball to the right spot at the right time and improvising when you need to. And I think that's the part where, okay, we have to balance out the pocket presence thing with the improvising so much in Colorado. He had to, right? So if improvising when you need to means you have to do it a lot, he had to do it a lot at Colorado. I could tell you from even when he go back and watch a Jackson State tape, he wants to throw the ball in rhythm. There's just times at Colorado where he just couldn't. He just couldn't do it, right? He just either wasn't protected or – you know, it wasn't the most complex offensive scheme either that always, you know, got guys open. They really relied on their talent and Shedeur's talents to make things happen.
Absolutely. All right, Shedeur Sanders, both of our QB1 for the 2025 NFL Draft. Let's go over quickly again, remind people what our 10 through 1 was. I'm going to go over your top 10 real quickly.
So my number 1, Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. Oh, we're going from the bottom. Sorry. Max Brosmer is the sleeper. Keep an eye on him. Kind of a Jimmy G comp there. Dillon Gabriel from Oregon at 10, Jalen Milroe from Alabama at 9, Riley Leonard from Notre Dame at 8, Jaxson Dart, the hot name right now from Ole Miss, I have him number 7, Kyle McCord from your Syracuse Orange at 6, and then I have Kurtis Rourke from Indiana at 5, Quinn Ewers from Texas at 4, national champion Will Howard at 3 from Ohio State, Miami's Cam Ward at 2, and Shedeur Sanders from Colorado at 1.
So my 10 through 1, my sleeper was Tyler Shuck, the quarterback out of Louisville. I have him at number 11. Riley Leonard, I have at number 10. 9, Kurtis Rourke. 8, Quinn Ewers. 7, Will Howard. 6, Kyle McCord. And then number 5, I got Dillon Gabriel. Number 4, I have Jalen Milroe. Number 3, Jaxson Dart. Number 2, Cam Ward. And number 1, Shedeur Sanders. So obviously, as you could tell by Dalton and my list, this quarterback class is wide open with a wide ranging of opinions. And I'm sure all of you have many opinions on the 2025 NFL Draft quarterback class. We want to hear all of them. Let us know in the comments below what your rankings are for the 2025 NFL Draft at the most important position in all of team sports at quarterback. We're going to be doing plenty more NFL Draft videos with position rankings. This is obviously the first one. We got running backs coming out very soon. It's a loaded running back class that I can't wait to break down with Dalton as well. Again, a lot of stuff coming out on this channel surrounding the 2025 NFL Draft from now until draft day. So subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of that. For our producer Eli back there, for Dalton Wassman, I'm Max Chadwick, and we'll see you guys very soon with our top 10 running backs in the 2025 NFL Draft. All right, that was good.